think we'll start. Is anybody who plans to speak, if you could sign in, please. If you're here to speak about 472, that's closed, so we're not taking any
Sign in when the time comes.
comments on 472. We have a withdrawal on 2964, Christopher and Jean Lynch, 58 Roscoe Drive. I move we accept that withdrawal.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We have two requests for adjournment. 2944, the Village of Southampton, Gin Lane, and 2976, Life Storage, 99 Mariners Drive.
I move we adjourn those cases.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
On case 2970, 550 and 554 Hill Street, we had planned to have a decision, but we're going to hold off that decision. We still have some more details to work out. So there'll be no decision on that this month. There'll be a decision on that in October. Now, we do have decisions on several other cases. 2959, number 71 Teacups LLC, 71 South Main Street.
I move we accept this decision as proposed.
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye. 2961, Thomas Fitzgerald III, 352 Captain's Neck Lane.
I move we accept this decision as proposed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yep, thanks, Chair.
2977, Hildegard Herford, 547 Meadow Lane.
I move we accept this decision as proposed.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
2979, 83 Fowler LLC, 83 Fowler Street.
I move we accept this decision as proposed.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Number 4 on the pending cases. You need to take number 4 while Bo is here?
You want to take number 4 first?
Yes. I recuse myself on that matter if you recall.
All right, we'll take number 278 ahead of 2972. DPD Southampton LLC, number 70 South Hill Street. You got that one there somewhere?
Applicant John Bennett. Oh, this has already been posted in May, so. Right? It's a pending case. Guys, it's a pending case, right? I was searching for my affidavit of mailing. Posted.
Pending.
Put it in already. Okay, great.
It was adjourned last month.
Yes, thank you. So, what we're requesting is some relief for, I suppose under the definition of the village code, it is technically a pool, but it's essentially a plunge bath, what's being proposed here, 8 by 10. After I was retained by my client, I was informed that a prior application on this had been withdrawn, so that's always a red flag for me. So I pulled that application, of course, and looked at it, and it was a radically different application that was withdrawn. That requested a much larger 12 by 27 pool, an actual pool, a swimmable pool, as well as a shed 10 feet from the front yard. What we have here in this neighborhood, which, as the aerial photograph we've distributed will show to you, is a request for a plunge pool in a neighborhood where just about every home has a pool. So this is not even a request to get something that's swimmable, but rather a request to have something where the owners of the property can cool off. Nothing more effective to doing that than to jump in the water. There was a request that was granted to build a new house on this property, and although a second story was allowed, part of the application for that house brought the dimensional setbacks into greater conformity. And a copy of that decision was submitted with the application. So again, we have a proposed plunge pool proposed to be located in a conforming location with request to rear and side yard requirements. Now, The way I look at the way these dimensional requirements have evolved in the village code, it was for some time, you could obtain a pool merely by meeting the typical accessory setbacks. But the village board, in their wisdom, decided that because of the activities that are typically associated with a pool, that they would increase that setback. I think this, there was some discussion on this that came to the fore on an application in the Roscoe subdivision that I handled and actually was withdrawn this evening, because as Mr. Guzowitz pointed out, you have a pool, but then you have the typical pool, you have a patio, you have surrounding area, you have activity, and therefore those side yard setbacks were something that you wanted to make sure that you maintained because of the noise and activity. No one's hanging out around a 10 by 20, 8 by 10 pool. It doesn't have the same sort of, when I say hang out, you don't have the same sort of concerns about noise, chaise lounges, the sort of thing, swimming, in the same level of creation of sound that you would have on a typical pool. So although we do need front yard relief, this plunge pool is not in the functional front yard. And I think that's important because a lot of times when you look at these things, variances throughout the village, if someone needs front yard relief, you still want to make sure that they're not in the functional front yard, because that, of course, has an aesthetic
What do you mean by
concern.
the functional front yard?
It's behind the, I'm sorry, it's behind that house. It's behind the leading edge of the house. So it's not, it's clearly in the...
It's got two front yards.
No, it has two front yards. It's clearly in the required front yard. There's no question about that. But it's behind the house. So that's something that I think historically you've taken into consideration. In addition, the applicant is proposing to install pool equipment within a proposed shed, so to, attenuate any sound with that. That would also respect the rear and side yard requirements, but we'd like relief to 42 feet from Platte Terrace, where 70 is required for the shed. Again, it's a modest pool located at conforming setbacks with respect to the neighboring properties to the east and the south. The only setbacks that wouldn't be respected are the ones on the street front, and of course the street itself is a 50-foot wide right-of-way. And then the lots to the west have structures that are even pools and houses that are even further away. And most important, as it relates to houses to the west, they're the actual house buffers their pool from the proposed plunge pool. So, given the width of the lot, it's not really appropriate to even ask, and which is why I see why the prior application was withdrawn, to ask for any sort of more traditional pool. So, why did I make this request? I made this request because I thought it was minimal. I thought it would be difficult at best for anyone to demonstrate that there'd be any negative impact on the character of the neighborhood, or that their own property would suffer, all of whom would benefit from pools would suffer any deleterious effect. But I also looked at some of the way the board had handled these matters in the past, and again, all applications are unique, but they all often give a path to some of the board's thinking on this. Matter of Michael Iannow, the board considered the request for the construction of a pool on a property on the corner of Pine Street and Burnett. I handled that case. Similar to the matter before the board, the applicant sought a request for a modest plunge pool. I think that one was 9'6". I have it here in my notes. It was 9'6" by 10. And similar to the within case, we requested relief from the setback from Burnett Street, but we were in the actual physical rear. When I say we weren't in the functional front yard, we were in the required front yard, but not in the actual front yard, and the board granted that relief. So I think that was a fair example to look at, and we submitted a copy of that decision. In Hawks Hill, the board considered a request for actually a 15 by 30 pool, and that was given relief to 20.4 feet from North Woolley Street. Now, I bring that to your attention because that was a 15 by 30-foot pool. That's an actual swimming pool where you could have the sorts of activities that gave rise to the trustees, at least in my estimation, creating the 20-foot side yard and rear yard requirements, which, of course, we're adhering to in this proposal. It's interesting, in Hawks Hill, the board stated in making its determination in view of the limited depth of the subject parcel from the easterly line, North Willie Street, to the westerly line, we find that the variance is warranted. So again, I would ask you to take a look at that. We do have an aerial showing that the pool is a very customary, it's a ubiquitous structure in the neighborhood. I would respectfully challenge anyone to say that there would be any undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood by an 8x10 plunge pool. 8x10, what is that? That's maybe the, maybe a little bit more than
It's about 8
the
foot
length of
long.
the pool by, you know, a little bit wider. Setback is not, I would say, the ills that cause the, 20-foot setback are not really present here. I don't think there's any concern for noise or people congregating around the pool, but that certainly wouldn't be any different than what's happening on any of the other surrounding parcels. So I think that's all I have to say at this point.
You're aware this lot is a corner lot?
Yes,
Two front
which
yards,
creates the
tiny,
difficulty.
tiny lot.
Yeah, similar to the lot on Burnett Street. I think it's actually a tad bigger. That was a tiny lot.
And it's up for sale again.
Okay.
So the owner bought it, they should have investigated to see what they could get on this property. They came
Right.
here the first time with a large pool, they quickly saw that wasn't
Large
going
pool.
anywhere.
Large pool. Yeah, no, I wouldn't have put that
And
out.
now they can't sell it unless they can get a pool, that's what it comes down to,
How deep is this pool?
you know.
It can be whatever. I think it's proposed as 6 feet, plunge pool, 6 feet.
I mean, it
7
seems to me it's almost just a hot tub more than
Yeah, it's more of a hot tub than anything. It really is, yeah.
I don't know why they didn't
How
just.
about
go for a hot
dipping
tub.
pool? A plunge pool makes a lot of noise, splashing. If you have a dipping pool, it's quiet.
It's a new one. I don't know what a dipping pool is. It almost sounds like
Take a
something you
dip.
find at a fine restaurant or something.
Take a dip. Wash
I know
my-
plunge
sell
pool, it does. It sounds like, cannonballs, right?
Yeah, plunging around,
We could limit
drinking.
the depth of it. That's not a
Dipping.
problem. Yeah, but that's not
You
a
can
problem.
dip in a 6-foot, 8 pool.
John, as I've said before, there are some lots that just can't afford any kind of pool.
I understand that, but when you look at the lots that you've said that about, there was the lot that I think there have been 3 or 4 tries on Elm Street. It's a 50-foot lot. This is another 10 feet.
That's been
And I
turned
think
down
you
every
could.
time.
Excuse me?
That's been turned down.
Yeah, but and let me tell you the
Or
difference.
withdrawn every time.
Or withdrawn every time. Let me tell you the difference on that one. They couldn't get anywhere near to accomplishing what I think are probably the most important setbacks are the 20-foot rear yard and side yard. I know the lot because I put the first application in and beat a very hasty retreat after I heard what the board had to say about that. But there was no way you could even get near the 20-foot side yard and rear yard requirements. You could probably achieve the 20-foot rear yard, but the side yards were, and you had, so you had that issue. But I'll leave it in your good hands. I'd like to see what the public has to say, and I might ask you to keep it open. I might want to put some economic evidence in.
Might what?
Might want to put some economic evidence in. Value of the property with and without the pool.
Well, we know what that's going to show.
Well, okay, but I should put in the record.
With a pool, it's worth XX. Without a
Sure.
pool, it's worth half of XX.
Sure. So what that
The
does.
owner should have thought of that before he or she bought the property.
Yeah, I know. You know what? Probably 90% of the people that you have who come in here and ask for variances, you could look at them and say, hey, did you know what the code was? The
That's
question
what
is.
lawyers are for.
No, the question is, I didn't represent the
I
person.
know that. I know.
But the question becomes, I don't know that that's so much the question as I guess arguably that's one of the 5-part standards, the self-created hardship. That's true. But the other 4 parts.
Problem I have with it is that you can't swim in it, you can't dive in it, I mean, you can plunge in it. I mean, it seems like the purpose for a pool, you want a pool and you can't do any of the functions that you would want to do in a pool.
I
So
guess
what's,
you can cool off in it. I think that's the whole idea.
you can cool off with a hose.
Yeah, but,
It's not as elegant. It's not quite as elegant, though.
but do you really think that with regular size
You have a pond and a
pools,
pool, pond's good for you?
regular size pool, people are doing 40 laps and stuff, they're dipping in and getting out, if they go in. So what's the difference?
I think the more you restrict the size, the less likely it is that the ills that gave rise to the 20-foot setback will occur. But, and again, I'll leave it in your hands. I do want
Need
to...
relief for the shed too, right?
Yeah, that's to house
And the
the,
patio?
I think the patio would be at grade.
Need relief
Or if it's
for
not-
the shed to house the equipment for the pool that's too close to the line.
That's right.
So we put a shed there. Even
To house
closer
it,
to the
to
line.
attenuate the sound.
And the patio, you also need relief for that.
I don't think so.
Well, you have it here,
It's at grade.
490-foot square foot patio,
Or if it's not, we'll make it at grade.
western front yard setback of 18 feet.
Yeah, I don't know that that would need relief if it was at grade.
That means 18 feet from Platte Terrace.
Well, if the board thinks that relief is necessary.
Well, you have it here, so I
Yeah,
know.
well, it was written, maybe the building inspector read it
Oh,
wrong.
oh,
I don't know that it is necessary, but if it is
Okay.
necessary, I would ask for that relief.
okay.
So subject to what anyone else says, and if I could respectfully request that after you hear what the folks have to say, that if you could keep it open.
Do you have any questions? Bo, you have any questions?
No.
Is there anyone from the audience who'd like to hear this application?
Good evening, Eric Bregman, Farrell Fritz. I represent all the neighbors, all four sides, east, north, south, and west. You already know, as you indicated, you already know, that the house was subject to a prior application. It didn't include a pool. The pool was withdrawn, but the rest of the variance was not withdrawn, and it was in fact granted. And that increased the imposition on the neighbors. But that was a decision you guys made. I'm not looking to redo that. But it did impose on, particularly on Mr. Littman on the east. And now, this one imposes on the neighbor to the south, who's Ms. Hackett. John's focus has been, well, this isn't really so bad because it doesn't change the setbacks, the purpose of the setbacks, which were side yard and rear yard, or front yard, I'm sorry. Side yard and rear yard. But at the same time, he says, this isn't really the front yard, it's really the rear yard, the functional rear yard. And that's what it is, because it goes right up against Ms. Hackett's property, and it's also right opposite or right adjacent to Mr. Lippman's property to the east. And then he says, well, it's not like a real pool because it's not like where people jump around and do whatever and sit in chases. But he has patio, and it's right in the middle of the patio. And the patio is going to have armchairs and out there for drinks and enjoying the afternoon sun. It's exactly like any other pool. You say a pool is a pool. It's not a dipping pool in my personal experience. A dipping pool is sort of a Japanese thing where it's a one-person thing. You get in and you relax. This is bigger than that. This is 2 or 3 people, kids playing in it, jumping in it, etc. It's big enough for that. So it's big enough to raise the concerns with which the trustees were focused on when they set the setbacks. And John also says that everyone around here has the pool. If you look at that aerial, and I don't know which one John had, but I have one too if you want it. But if you look at the aerial, you can see all the pools. They're all shielded from their neighbors. They're not next to the neighbors. They're behind the house, etc. If you look at all of them around in the neighborhood, it's a very different situation than imposing on particularly Ms. Hackett and Mr. Littman on the other side. In terms of what they were looking for, my understanding is this is a sophisticated real estate family. It's not somebody who made a mistake and forgot about the pool. They know what they're doing, is my understanding, and have lots of investments around the village. And finally, this is exactly, with respect, what the 11619C3, which is the part of the code that says you can do whatever you want with a non-conforming house so long as you don't increase the non-conformity. There are already non-conformities here from pre-existing non-conformities. You added to them in your last variance, but some people, basic parts of the house are non-conforming. And that section of the code emphasizes the sensitivity for non-conforming buildings and the impact on the neighborhood. And it says you can't increase the non-conformity of a non-conforming building. That's the bottom line. This is a pool. I think, Mr. Chairman, you said the last time some lots just don't have pools, and this is one of them. It's certainly a benefit to the applicant, but it causes significant impacts to the neighbors. Your prior decision made some impacts too. That's done and over. This is more impacts, and it doesn't need it. And all it is, as you said, is money. This is not somebody who needs a pool for their grandchildren, although the buyer might want that. I don't think you need it since you already know it, but since August, the house has been on sale and Sotheby's. So I'd like to just submit this for the record, if I may. So it was never the applicant's intention to live there. So I think it will have an impact on the neighborhood, the character of the neighborhood. The character of the neighborhood is different with the other pools. It is extremely self-created. And it's not necessary except to increase the profit on the deal. Thank you.
The depiction certainly makes the lot look a lot larger than it
It
really
certainly
is.
does. And that, by the way, is with the variances that you granted, and the date on that is August 18. It was actually in an earlier brochure. That was the date it was emailed to me. That was actually in Sotheby's brochure before your opinion granting the variance.
Eric, did you,
I'm sorry.
did you put a copy of the prior decision in the file? Or submit one to the board?
It's in there.
I think it's, yes, John,
Thank you.
the application.
Thank you.
That decision, I don't believe, mentions the pool because the first time that application came on, the applicant was sort of continuing with the pool.
Is there anybody else who'd like to hear this application?
Two
You have something to add, John?
Two responses. My learned adversary, Mr. Bregman, talks about the functional rear yard, functional side yard, rear yard, still a 20-foot setback that we're asking for relief from. Mr. Bregman's concern is the neighbor to the south. I don't know how many times we meet the setback to the neighbor to the south. We meet the 20-foot setback to the neighbor to the south. I don't know how many times I've heard this board when somebody comes in and complains about something, says, well, they don't need any relief as it relates to you. I don't need any side yard relief. 116.19.3c has absolutely nothing to do with this application. That's a question, that's a building to structure section which deals with the increase in the degree of nonconformity of a house. It has nothing whatsoever to do with a pool. Nothing whatsoever. So it's an inapt citation. And finally, for whatever it's worth, yes, usually people are in here asking for variances so that they can increase the value of their house. I know it's fashionable, but I find it irrelevant, and as I'm sure you do, to say that, quote, it's only about the money, or this isn't a pool for the grandchildren. I'm sort of just tired of hearing that. But anyway, thank you very much. And if you could hold it open, I just wanted to submit some economic evidence. I appreciate it.
Shall we hold it open?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you, Bob. On the application of case number 2972, Morgan and Robin Grace, 292 Oxford.
The applicant, John Bennett. I believe, this is a request for some front yard relief for a variance, for a tennis court on a, probably one of the more unusually shaped lots in the village. I think where we were was the last time, I think it's fair to say, both in reviewing my notes and the transcript, because the board merely wanted to see what we had offered was some rather significant landscaping to make sure, the whole idea is that this pool will effectively, by reason of the sinking of the pool, by reason of the existing significant vegetative buffer on the property, and by reason of the additional vegetative buffering and screening proposed 13 cryptomeria, for example, along Ox Pasture Road, is to make this court totally invisible to the passerby, a combination of the sinking and the vegetative buffer. So we did have Tim Rump from Areas Design draw that up, and we did a couple things. We showed the planting plan and also the type of plant. Not only did we show the planting plan and the existing vegetation along both Halsey Neck and Ox Pasture, but you'll see we planted the type of planting that the planning board likes to see. This will have to go to the planning board if the board is kind enough to grant the relief, but we wanted to offer conditions on this planting as part of a condition for a requested relief for a variance. Again, the planning board may want additional planting. We're hoping that they won't, because we think this is very significant, but on the other hand, if they do want a reasonable additional planting, we'll of course be required to do that. You remember this application first came in, when it first came in, we were able to, we had placed the court 20 feet closer, further away from Ox Pasture. You'll also remember that there are variances on either side, one for 30 and one for 40 feet. But the neighbor to the south, represented by Mr. Bregman, stated that if the board were to entertain a setback at 40 feet, they would have no objection to the request for relief. So I don't want to belabor the point other than to say I'm here to answer any questions and to present, or just to remind the board that we did, as per the request and as per our offer, submit a landscaping plan. I had hoped to have Tim Rumpf here to soldier on next to me, as I always feel more comfortable with him next to me, but he said, it's a pretty simple plan, John. I think you can handle it yourself, quote. So that's really all I have.
There's a lot of trust in you.
Yeah, well, hopefully not foolishly. But yeah, so again, tennis court, front yard tennis court on either side here as a result of this board's grants. But as much as anything, it demonstrates the character of the neighborhood. And the attempt is on this extremely unique lot to make the neighbors happy, but also to make it disappear so that no one will know it's there.
So the two owners managed to work things out
Yes.
as far as the setback
Yep.
from the owner to the south.
Yes, absolutely.
Is there any chance that this piece of land can be sold off
This,
separately?
we can cover it against that. Cover it against any attempt for subdivision. It's a little strange. It looks like it wants to be two parcels. It's essentially a rectangle and then a strip and then another rectangle. I don't know how it got that way.
Is it large enough to be sold off?
Oh no, it's I think
small,
as
right?
one lot, it's less than. Let me see how it is. It's a R120 zone, right? And the square footage is, forgive me, it's 95,000. So, and if you wanted a covenant against any attempt at subdivision, I think that would be more than. I don't think it'd be a hard sell.
Yeah.
I'd have to not only the planning board, but I'd have to come to you You've granted some relief in those instances, but I think the best anyone's been able to do is create a couple of 2-acre lots in a 3-acre zone where literally every lot in the block was a 2-acre lot. I think this would be a hard sell as a subdivision application. It would need an awful lot of relief. So you don't even have the square footage for one lot in a conforming area. So I would have no problem with the covenant against any sort of further attempts to subdivide it. But I think that's all I have.
Do you have any questions? I've heard this one about 3 times in a row now.
That's the second one, I think.
Second? Maybe you postponed it.
I postponed it once.
Amy, you in?
I'd like to hear from Mr. Bregman because I have only one comment with respect to John's offer on the covenant, and it probably relates to the possibility if this was ever to be separated, the only logical thing would be to attach it directly to Mr. Bregman's client's parcel.
Oh, unless you wanted to say...
That would be the only exception where, as long as it remained an accessory to
The neighbor wanted to
existing
buy it on
dwelling.
the Terrence Court.
But otherwise, it couldn't be separated into an independent parcel on its own.
So
That's what you're offering.
Yeah, you could prohibit further subdivision, but not potential lot line modification. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that, because you're right, that's the only place it would go. Yeah. But even that is a tough
Well,
sell,
we got
because
the-
you'd have to get a variance.
Well, you're making his lot more conforming.
For, an
existing
area
lot,
variance
yeah.
from you to create a lot that's 1/3 of the zoning, so.
Yeah.
But his lot is non-conforming also, so you're making one a little more conforming, the other a little more. And at the end, that would be the only logical thing, if you were to consider such a thing.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Just kidding.
Is there anyone from the public who would like to be heard?
Just confirming, Mr. Bennett's office sent me the copy of the plan, and it's fine with it. I've had no hint of any interest in buying the property. It hasn't come up, but if it does, I'll take some lessons in ingenuity from Mr. Bruin to figure out how to do that.
Do you have anybody else who'd like to speak to this application? You want to close it? You want to close it?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Yeah, you're out now.
That ends the pending applications. It brings us down to the new applications, the first one being 2980 Willow Lane, Holdings, 90 Wyandanch Lane. And this only has to do with the landscaping. Where is this?
2980.
Maybe it's here. Here we go. Yeah, here we go.
These are the beastie
Mr.
ones.
Walker.
Just like this?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, Jim Walker from InterScience. This is 90 Wyandanch. This application is for a 25-foot wide wetlands buffer. Planting plans were prepared by Ed Hollander. The plans are in front of you. The plants that are going to be planted and used in the buffer are there. We made application to New York State DEC at the same time as we made application to the village. It's a pretty straightforward application. It's 25-foot wide buffer to provide wetlands habitat and prevent fertilizers from leaching into the pond.
Any questions?
No, I don't.
I just wanted to add that this was a condition, this application was a condition of a prior
Yeah.
variance.
And it got approved. This was one of the conditions. Chick, you have anything?
I don't. We reviewed the, sorry,
You got the microphone, I guess, that nobody else has.
it's way over there. We did review the application. I would agree with Jim's characterization that this will increase habitat, reduce fertilizer-dependent vegetation, filter pollutants, control erosion, and the plan looks acceptable, so I have no further questions or comments.
Is there anyone from the public who'd like to talk to this application? This is a case that was decided already insofar as the buildings go. We just asked for a plan for the wetlands, which he just gave us. You want us to close this?
Yes.
I think you can close it, and my understanding is Chick's office has prepared a wetland special permit with conditions, pretty much standard conditions, and if the board is willing, you can consider adopting that this evening.
It's fine.
Yep. So I believe you all have the draft decision,
Yeah, it's here.
subject to closing the hearing and your decision to move forward.
So we can move that we accept this.
I move we accept this decision as proposed.
A second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
On the application of case number 2981, Church of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and Mary, 168 Hill Street.
For the applicant, John Bennett. I'm just trying to work off a little bit of time in territory.
What?
Just trying to work off a little bit of time in territory.
You better get some more cases.
That was a softball. So this is an application for relief in order to create a relatively small expansion on the what was both the it was, at one time was the convent, then became the combination convent and rectory, and now is the rectory to the church. I'm looking for my, pardon me, I'm looking for my talking notes, which I could probably do without, but it's important for me to have them as a security blanket. Where are they? Yep. Sorry. So the property's on the south side of Hill Street and the west side of First Neck Lane. We did submit an aerial photograph of the property, and I think everybody knows where this is. There are two front yards, Hill Street to the north and Terry Court to the south. It's a small 299 square foot addition as an additional spiritual room on an existing two-story masonry building. It was unclear to me. We asked for both 80. We asked for relief both from the 80 feet and the 90 foot because it was unclear to me whether or not this was an accessory structure or a principal structure. One could argue that it's accessory to the church, but on the other hand, it is a residence with a chapel. So I figured best to request relief from both the 80-foot and the 90-foot front yard. The building itself is a non-conforming structure, and thus relief from 11628C1A is required for this minimal 299 square foot expansion. The existing two-story masonry building has a footprint of 5,600 square feet. So accordingly, this 300 square foot addition is significantly less than the 50% of the usable area of the existing structure. It's a tiny, tiny request. So we would like what we suggest in limited areas of minimal further encroachment within the front yard. I think one of the things that is very helpful, if you've been able to drive down Terry Court, but if for the sake of those who haven't, I have some photographs that I took myself. The actual street right-of-way in that area is quite wide and extremely well planted and buffered. So this is from Terry Court looking in to the rectory building. And you can see that there's, we're going to do some planting back there near the garage at the request of the Terry Court residents. But as you can see from these photographs, there is a substantial existing buffer along where the addition is proposed. Probably the best to be able to see, there's a car there for scale, you can see there's not only existing vegetated buffer, but there's also quite a bit of just linear distance between the pavement and the area of the proposed expansion. We were concerned about the residents of Terry Court and how they felt. I think Sean will probably.
Can I just interrupt
yeah,
you for
sure.
a second? On one of these aerial photographs, could you just point out where on the building? I'm just thinking,
It's towards the easterly end.
is this the location?
Yeah, it's, Sean, you want to, maybe you can help me be more specific, being a design professional and showing where we are.
Sean Leonard, the architect.
So you see where that little bump out is, it's going to add on to that.
Is that this
Yes,
area?
yes,
Right.
yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it's on the southeasterly portion of the building. Right there, currently there's a little bump out there, and there's a small room that they currently use. But for the purpose of the number of people that will come use it as a spiritual room, he needs a little bit of a bigger room there. It's the only room, it's actually just off of the kitchen, so it's the only space, there's actually a wide enough room. All the other rooms throughout the building are all kind of chopped up and made into small little offices, especially along the north end. And then the chapel is at the very end here of the easterly end of the building. So that would be I have.
Oh, perfect. If you could hand them in. I have some smaller copies, but those work. So we did contact some of the neighbors on Terry Court as well as the homeowners association. What I'm handing up is an email chain in which there were certain requests made for conditions to the grant of the variance. The planting of green giant arborvitae, 8 to 10 foot heavy, along the proposed expansion of the rectory. And we're removing and rebuffering the common boundary by the back near the garage. And amongst other things, we would have agreed to a condition that said all of these new plantings would have to be appropriately irrigated so as to make sure that they survive and are maintained. Unfortunately, the neighborhood was very supportive once these conditions were agreed to, so I'm hoping that will allow you to feel comfortable to a finding that there's not an impact on the character of the neighborhood. Again, it's a very small addition, hopefully not a use that is anything beneficial as a whole, certainly as a whole to the community, but not going to create any sort of noise or pollution or anything that would impact on the neighbors. And I think that's why they were so supportive. Pretty small. 299 square feet. And we would have, we told the homeowners association as well as the neighbors that we would agree to this planting plan and understanding that the plants would be properly irrigated so as to ensure their survivability as express conditions of the variance.
There's no place else within the building where this room would fit logically?
If you've been in there, this area is a chapel, and then the rest is it's all carved up into little offices. Most of them were probably bedrooms at one time. It was a convent. At first it was a convent. And then it was a combination of convent and rectory, and now it's the rectory with the chapel at the end of it. There's some administrative offices, but the rooms are all rather small.
They are. The western end of the building is where the priests, that's where their housing is, on the western end. So that's their rooms and stuff. So this is the only thing left that's of an area that's kind of part of the office.
Public.
Public space for, right, public space for the...
And I think the north side of the building is right, almost up against a road that's heavily trafficked.
Access driveways,
Yeah.
right, and anything bumping out in that direction would be right into the driveway.
It has to be open there for traffic.
Oh, yeah, for emergency vehicle access and just general traffic circulation during services and other things. So I think generally everybody agrees that the church and the Terry Court folks are good neighbors, and we hope to continue that. And that's why we're thankful to them for their support.
Do you have anything else? Mark, Dan?
John,
Wayne?
on the landscape plan, landscaping over here is,
Yeah, because
there's somebody over here that desires it?
Yes, there's a neighbor over there that desires it, and so, as did the homeowners association. It's a lot easier to convince the client to say yes to the conditions that that a neighbor wants, as opposed to having a neighbor that's not very happy about the application. So, yeah, even though it's not in the area of the addition, we put it over there as well.
The last question I have is, whose stockade fence is that?
Stockade fence is probably ours, but it's on the Terry Court property. We're going to shift that to the north, so that the planting and the fencing is on our property.
And the last question, the 10-foot evergreens won't create any shading or light access on that south side of the addition that you're putting in?
It will, but that was okay by the pastor.
Okay. Make the trees slow grow.
Yeah, the neighbors wanted this. I thought it was kind of to be supportive, so I wasn't about to argue with them about things like that.
Is there anyone from the public who'd like to refer to this application?
My name's Paul Herman, and I represent Terry Court Association. We are supportive of this. We've worked with Father Mike, and the buffering that we're looking for is actually going, it is our fence, by the way. It's our fence.
Sorry.
So,
Well, we'll replace that.
I know you have to.
No, I'm sorry. It's very tight back there.
Yeah. And the plantings are on our side of the property line, on our side of the fence. And there's one neighbor, my next door neighbor, who's very, very much affected by this. So we worked it out. The only questions I have is who replaces the dead tree? So talk about that.
We'll
Is it some sort of covenant we can do?
Well, I think one of the conditions of the variance was that they would have to be proper, which we offered, and we talked about with Mr.
Irrigation.
Eric, was not only would we irrigate it so that to maintain it.
But the
Because
tree,
unless it's maintained, what good is it? You're right. Yeah, absolutely.
so for clarification though, John, the trees on this plan are shown to be planted on the church property?
Yes, absolutely.
No.
Which,
No. Back. Yeah, we're going to move this. We're going to move these.
You're moving the fence, correct.
Right.
They have their garbage area there, which is, frankly, when Father Mike saw it, he agreed that it's very poorly kept, and the debris flies into our property. Our fence has been falling down due to their neglect in that area. So it's great because we had a conversation, and we're all in agreement to make things better. So we're supportive.
Thank you.
That's the reason for the area is removed from the addition. But this area needed help, so we're willing to do it.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to this application? Yeah, we'll close it.
close it for a decision?
Close it for decision.
So moved.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Gentlemen, I'm going to hit the road, nothing else on for the evening.
We got to start to rearrange things for you.
You tried that before.
I know we tried, it never worked.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
All right, kid, take care. on the application of case number 2982, Stephen and Sheila Piper, 54 Hilda Street.
Good evening. For the applicant, Gilbert G. Flanagan, 21 South Main Street, Southampton. I have an affidavit of posting and an affidavit of mailing. Okay, this is a fairly straightforward application on its face. It's an application for a modest expansion of an existing two-family dwelling that's located at 54 to 56 Hilda Street in the village. I'll start out by noting that we need no dimensional variances, no setbacks, no relief from the gross floor area limitations, lot coverage, pyramid law, or any of those items. The only reason we're in front of this board is that the house is a two-family house, lawful pre-existing two-family house in a single-family zone, and we're seeking to perform a modest expansion of well under 50%, which the village code allows you to consider under 11628C1. As I indicated, this house is a lawful two-family dwelling. I submitted a copy of the CO with the application. This property actually passed to the current applicants by inheritance. It's been in the family for a couple of decades at least. The file also indicates that my application included a copy of a previous variance that was granted to this property under the same section. There was a modest addition approved on the north side of the house for the front unit of the two units. That was granted in 1994, and thereafter received a certificate of occupancy, so everything should be in order. If you look at the original decision, the 1994 decision, it's important to note that for the baseline of the 50% expansion rule, the gross floor area or habitable space of the existing house before any variances was 2,048 square feet. So doing the math, 50% expansion of that would be 1,024 square feet, of which 212 square feet was used up under the first variance, which means that before we reach the 50% threshold, there'd be 812 square feet more. The proposed additions that we're asking for this evening are two. There is a dormer which would be located on the southeast portion of the existing house of 272 square feet, and a one-story addition at the rear of the house of 270 square feet, which amounts to 542 square feet, which in and of itself is a 26% expansion. So if you add that to the previous expansion, you amount to a total aggregate of 36.7%, which is obviously under the 50% threshold. One might ask what the reason for the additions is. My clients actually have lived out of town. I actually grew up with Mr. Piper. He and I shared the same class in high school. He has since, I understand, retired from the ministry, and he wishes to move back to the property and return to the village. And he and his wife would be occupying the rear unit, which would be the beneficiary of these variances. The purpose of the dormer would be for more usable space for the existing bedrooms. We're not adding bedrooms, just making them more habitable. And the first floor addition would be for the purpose of a slightly larger living and dining area. It's important to note that we're not adding any new facilities, we're not adding new bathrooms, bedrooms, or anything that would require health department relief or more off-street parking spaces. I also submitted with the application, in case the question comes up, whether or not this continues to be a lawful two-family dwelling, and you'll see in the file that there was a list of all the tenants who have occupied both units from the date of the CO in 1993 up until the present time. I would say at this point that I would submit, if you look at the maps which I submitted, and by the way, after your work session, I did submit some neighborhood analysis information, which I want to make sure I've gotten, including an aerial photograph, a Google aerial photograph showing the property and the surrounding properties and their improvements. I also submitted, which I received from Village Files, surveys of the adjoining properties. The one I couldn't get, which was not in the Village Files, was the property immediately across the street. Although if you look on the Google Earth map, you will see that, a photo rather, you'll see that that house is substantially set back from the street. I would submit that if anyone is the most affected by this application, it would be that certain neighbor to the south who
Yeah, that's rough.
was sitting here a few minutes ago, Mr. Bennett, and he
Left in protest.
and he told me that I could voice his absolute objection to the application. But in any event, no, he did say it. He had no problem with it, and I can say that for the record. So I don't know that I have to say too much more about this. I do have Mark Matthews, the applicant's architect, present. The applicants are also here if you have any particular questions.
The parking's a little tight. Is the parking okay? with the
Parking's
addition?
not being changed yet. We're not, if we were adding a bedroom, yeah, but we're not.
I'm good. Wayne,
I have no questions. It's pretty,
anyone from the public would like to hear of this application? Close it.
So moved. Close for decision.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
The latch.
How are you? Good. You and Bill are in the same class. I have kids, too.
They're brilliant, some of them, right?
Huh?
Some of them very smart. Yeah, super smart.
One of his sons graduated before.
Yeah.
On the application, case number 2983, Beechwood Latch LLC, 101 Hill Street.
For the applicant, David Gilmartin Jr., Farrell Fritz, 50 Station Road, Watermill, New York, and with me tonight are George Benedict and Stephen Dubb, who are principals in Beechwood Latch. Overall, this is an application to convert the Latch property from the existing rooming house into a 24-unit multifamily condo facility. As you may remember, we were here on January 28, 2016, with the initial application, and you referred us to the planning board to perform the SECRA analysis. On April 4th, we made an application to the planning board, wherein we had a public hearing, decided to declare a positive declaration on the project, designated it as type 1, and made known their intent to act as lead agency. At their meeting on July 5th, they declared their self-lead agency after the expiration of the 30-day requirement under the law. A scoping session was done on August 1st, 2016, to determine exactly what the environmental impact would assess. Following that scoping session on September 6, 2016, the planning board adopted the scoping outline. In October 2016, Beechwood submitted a draft environmental impact statement to the planning board and to their consultant. Significant changes were suggested by both the planning board and the consultant. The draft environmental impact statement was submitted, and on March 6th, a public hearing concerning that draft environmental impact statement was held, where all of the boards in the village, the public, and Beechwood all had input into the draft environmental impact statement, and a 14-day written comment period was added to it, which expired on March 12, 2017. In June 2017, Beechwood submitted the final environmental impact statement. On August 7th, the planning board filed and circulated the statement to this board, most notably, and to the other boards that are involved in this application that have to submit permits. And on September 5th, the planning board adopted an overwhelmingly positive findings statement regarding this project. I think it's important to note at this point that while Beechwood was the drafter, it was the planning board that directed the contents of the DEIS, draft environmental, the final environmental, and then it was the planning board that drafted the finding statement. This finding statement is binding on all of the agencies within the village. It's binding on Beechwood, and I have submitted it as part of the application. I say all that by way of the fact that this project has been looked at very closely by the village planning board during the secret process. So getting to the application we have before you, I think it's easier to consider this if you break it down into the three types of variances we are looking for. First, we're looking for a change of use from the current latch use, the motel inn use, to the 24-unit condo. The second is sort of the overall project variances that we require for the entire property, which are the lot coverage and the minimum lot area per dwelling unit. And then the final, or the third part of it, are the setback variances for the individual buildings. So initially, we're looking for a change in use under Section 116-28, which allows us to change from one non-conforming use to another. Section 28 contains a standard. That standard states that the change in use shall be beneficial to the neighborhood. The second part of that test says that this board is entitled to put any reasonable conditions on a grant of that variance for the change of use. With respect to whether it's beneficial to the neighborhood, the finding statement was clear, and it was clear in several parts of it, but I'll quote the most important. Overall, the change in non-conforming use from a rooming house to an attached community would be beneficial to the general neighborhood. And that I think is the significant statement in that finding statement with respect to whether it's beneficial, and they'll get to later the character of the neighborhood, which is part of the village law test you have to consider. As part of the support for that statement, the finding statement specifically states that the change will eliminate an illegal overuse of the property, incorporate adequate infrastructure, which is the wastewater treatment and the stormwater runoff. It will provide a use as compatible with the surrounding area, which they stated as commercial versus residential. It will provide patrons to the village businesses. It will enhance property values in the area, and I think first and foremost, with respect to the application, is it'll maintain the historic character of the village through the retention of the Terry Cottage and the village latch buildings. One of the plans, if you look at our site plan, is to take the village latch building and move it forward so that it's at the same setback as the Terry Cottage. And this, the finding statement found, would raise the interest level, if you will, and bring it closer and make it more available to the public. And it would also serve as a screen the development that's going on behind it. The second part of the test, which you're entitled to put reasonable conditions, Beechwood would agree to any reasonable condition that this board would put on a grant of variance if you were so inclined. After the change of use, we need, again, two types of variance. One is the overall variance, which is the lot coverage and minimum lot area per dwelling unit. Those are, and it was directly noted in the finding statement that this is a difficult analysis. And an example of that is the amount of variances that we need that are on paper. But if you look at the finding statement, it says that it's impossible to take a non-conforming use and apply the underlying R20 zoning restrictions to it. The real analysis that should be done is comparing the existing use, the inn, motel use to the condominium use. And that's the fair way to consider this application. And again, if you look at, the amount of variances that we need, that finding within the finding statement really rings true. So as you consider those variances, I'd ask you to look at the context again of the existing use and going to the condominium use, which the finding statement overwhelmingly supports. Turning to the village law test for the individual setbacks that we need for the structures. The benefit to Beechwood is clear. They'll be able to take the property and use it in a way that allows it to redevelop it, and if this is part of their business, they redevelop properties and they sell condos. But I would also say that this application and the variances will be a benefit to the village, and the finding statement supports that. Again, as I stated previously, with respect to whether it's beneficial on the change, an illegal overuse of the property will be eliminated. Adequate infrastructure will be put into the property, namely a wastewater treatment system, which Beechwood voluntarily agreed to do an alternative, innovative on-site wastewater treatment system. They were entitled to have grandfathered flow, so they didn't need to update it. But during the secret process, that was one of the discussions with the planning board, and they voluntarily agreed to do that. So you're going to get an innovative alternative system there. We don't know what that is because the types of systems keep changing with the health department, but the finding statement says that we'll use a system that's appropriate at the time that we get to the health department and that approval. Any issues regarding groundwater are resolved, much to the village's benefit. As you know, that this use has existed, I want to say, since the 40s. It was part of the original Irving Hotel, and it sort of took the runoff from the Irving Hotel. Both the Terry Cottage and the Latch Building did. So the infrastructure there is currently pretty old, and it'll be completely updated. It'll provide a compatible use with the surrounding area, so you're going to a residential use, from a commercial to a residential use. We have the Southampton Inn to our east, and then Whitefield to our west, so it works as a nice transition use from the village business area to the single-family dwellings as you get further down Hill Street. Again, it'll enhance some property values, and it'll maintain the historic features of the area, and then certainly of the lot. Again, so that I think is a clear indication from the finding statement that there'd be no detriment to the character of the neighborhood. As far as alternatives, only this board can grant a change of use under the zoning code, which is why we're here. The third prong that you have to consider is whether this is substantial. And again, I think you have to consider the totality of the circumstances, the improvement of the use, and the improvement of the infrastructure. This part of the test was addressed in the finding statement at page 15. Again, I made it a part of the application. I can certainly provide. I have additional copies if you need it. Impact to the environment. Clearly, this is an upgrade, and again, the finding statement overwhelmingly supports the positive impact that's going to result if this board grants a variance to the environment. And finally, with the self-created hardship, this is an application to redevelop an old, outdated, both physical structure and use. We have demonstrated, and the finding statement agrees, that there's a need for this type of use in the village, and that the conversion from the existing use to this use will benefit the village. I have, again, Mr. Benedict and Mr. Dubber here. We can answer any questions, but we'd respectfully ask that you grant the variance request.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
You had mentioned you wanted to do an upgraded septic treatment plant, but I look at there's a preliminary layout and materials plan, and it looks like there's a lot of lot coverage, and I don't know how much room a septic treatment plant would take up or where it would go, and is there enough room on the property to fit that?
There is enough room. We've been through it with
I'd like to see it, you know.
Well, that would be part of the site plan process, is we have to go back to the planning board to get site plan approval. We can Mr. Dubb, I think, can add more to that.
Hey, Stephen Dubb with Beechwood. So it seems like you think there's an additional building, an additional structure that would be built there as sewage treatment.
I mean, I don't know. That's what,
No,
but
yes, so-
usually that's what's required.
That's not the case. The advanced septic systems that we're talking about it's a number of systems that Rooney referenced, so I'm not sure exactly which one yet. The village or the health department is testing a bunch of different types, but they would be underground. So from the point of view of somebody standing on the property or looking at it, you wouldn't know the difference between an advanced septic system and a traditional septic system.
I just don't know if you have enough ground area for the system, you know, until we see that. That's something I would definitely like to see.
Yeah, it's something we can show. We've had our engineer.
Because you talked about
lay it out.
keeping stormwater runoff on the property, so you're going to have that underground, and then you're going to have septic underground, and then you're going to have utilities underground. There's a lot going on underground here, and it seems like a lot of ground is covered up by roads and buildings, so I'd like to see how it all fits, you know.
Our engineer has laid it all out, so we can submit a plan demonstrating that.
Then the second question I have is, I read through the planning board's report, but has the fire marshals looked at this as far as safety factors? It seems like it's one central road going down the middle, a little bit of bottleneck. Did you have a report from them saying that this can be adequately serviced by emergency vehicles and equipment?
Yeah, it was referred, Randy can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was referred to the fire department, and the reason it was designed with
You have a report from them?
I don't know if they issued a written report.
We have a report. I don't have it tonight, but that's true. The plan was ultimately changed based on the input from the fire marshal, but we can provide that also.
That's all my questions right now.
The cul-de-sac at the north end of the site plan that you see has been designed to accommodate a fire truck so that it can turn around at the end.
No, but if one stops in the middle, they can't get to the end. That's why I was just curious if they were happy with the flow. Because usually usually it's not just one fire truck that shows up, so.
Yeah, understood.
Can you give us a comparison with Whitefield in regard to the acreage of both properties and the number of units on both properties?
I don't have that information off the top of my head. It is a part of the DEIS and then the FEIS. I can tell you that the finding statement concluded that this was an appropriate density on the lot.
But I think I would like to see what Whitefield has, how many units they have, what their acreage is, as compared with this application.
Also, the square footage of these units, they're all close to 5,000 square foot, either 48, you know, they're big, you know, the square footage of each unit, so.
I think that's incorrect. The square footage is closer to 2,500 to 2,900, I think, with some of the smaller units in the 18.
Well, it says GFA 4816 on the, that's what's just written on the plan
The
here.
ones in the back are all 4,000.
One's are 42, 34. So
There are 2 units to a building, so
So I guess maybe if that's wrong, what are the square footage of these?
Do you have floor plans for the buildings?
Except the 2 of them, they're all over 4,000.
Yeah.
These 2 are 39.
David, are there floor plans for the buildings?
There are. We don't have them.
Okay.
And again,
You can submit
we're in the conceptual.
So you're saying there's 2 units in each one of what are labeled as 2 stories?
No, they're all. Those are
Each
one
one is a unit.
except for the the back unit on the northeast corner.
Looks like they're all 2 stories, and they're all over 4,000 square feet, except for 2, 18 and 19.
That's as the plan is currently, the preliminary layout, but we can get you more of a final layout.
Are there garages included in that?
Not in the units, no garage in the units.
There are one-car garages in every townhouse unit, so one thing I could think of is maybe that square footage is inclusive of the garages.
Are they underneath or at the first floor level? Or?
At grade, at ground level.
They're not shown.
Right.
And I'm sure you have all the parking calculations figured out, but are they listed anywhere?
Yes.
Maybe in the planning.
Say they have 70 some spaces.
It is listed on the plan.
Yeah, there's 74 total. If you look at the proposed project data at the bottom, there's 74 parking spaces provided inclusive of the garages.
You can't see it, of course, but...
On the first. No, you can't see them. Parking divided driveways, off street.
19 on street. Garage in units, 21.
Mr. Benedict just explained that number on the square footage includes the basements. So it's 3 floors, that's why it's,
Includes the basement.
yeah, but, and
So
we'll
it'd be
get,
about 2/3 of that.
we'll get the floor plans as Mr.
Okay.
Bruin.
So is there floor plans, elevations, and how many bedrooms in each unit?
We can provide that. On the parking, I'm not sure if you clarified, it's 74 spaces shown, broken out as 19 driveway spots, 26 on-street parking spots, 21 in-garage units, and 8 parking spaces in standalone garage buildings. So 74 spaces for 24 proposed homes.
3 for each unit.
On street, there's a number 3 here between the buildings, are they parking spaces?
That's the count of, right, those are 3 spaces.
I see.
Three.
But in the back, I don't know.
You got 12 there. Spaces? 21 is 29. 26 and 25 and 29. 74, right?
Yes. Correct.
We'll have to digest here.
How are they accommodating sort of like things like garbage pickup here? I mean, is there like each unit going to have their own, is there going to be a centralized garbage? You know, I'm just thinking of,
Each home gets its own garbage can, and once or twice a week, it's picked up by
so they keep them in their garage and they move them out to the street? Is that pretty much?
on the morning of pickup. And the condominium association is responsible for contracting with the garbage company for pickup.
seeing how they access this. How'd you get to this? Parking space. You're coming in. You drive right down through here. Just drive right. That's it. There's one road, 26 feet wide. This is it. This is your only access point. Yeah. One access point. Okay. Yeah, that's why I was concerned about, you know. You will have floor plans for us to look at?
We'll provide them.
Because I don't know, I don't know where the egresses are from these buildings. Just one from the front? Are they going to have doors in the back, you know, with, rear patio areas or seating areas? You know, I don't know what's going on.
Sure, yeah, they'll have, every home will have a door in the back also for a small patio in the rear yard. And they'll, of course, be designed to code, for egress purposes.
But if we're reading this correctly, there's one way in, one way out.
Except for the Terry Cottage home, which has its own driveway. That's correct. There's one way in and one way out. It's a sort of a tight property, and it's landlocked on three sides. So it's only one street to go to.
So these are going to have finished basements?
I don't think so. We haven't made that decision yet.
Oh, because it went, because it was included in the floor area. That's why I didn't know it was included, because it was going to be finished. Because then if it's going to be finished, then it's going to be these access areaways, which aren't shown here either.
I think we'll have to look into it, and we'll get back to you on it.
Okay.
What's the shaded area?
The hatched square.
The hatched area.
It's a motor court or a courtyard. It's meant to represent pavers or Belgian block.
All right. So within
A motor court.
That's the term our architect has used for it. He wanted a statement of entrance when you pulled into the property. His thoughts were reminiscent of...
the parking there, in other words?
Well, there are garage buildings on either side. There's additional parking for the homes.
How about parking inside the motor court itself? Is there going to be parking? No. So you had an ambulance came in off of Hill Street, they'd have to go through that area.
Correct.
Motor through.
What are they doing for mail? Are they going to have like one of those central mail locating drops where people all have to go up to get their mail? Where's that going to be?
In front of the clubhouse.
In front of the clubhouse?
Or attached to the wall, if it's something you'd like us to know.
Well, people are going to drive up to it, park it out of their car, and go get their mail, so I want to make sure that works, that...
This may be a dumb question, but the units, do the owners of the units have the right to do things behind the unit? We've had some condos where all of a sudden people...
We put strict rules in the condominium association documents because we're concerned in selling condominiums that prospective purchasers' next door neighbor doesn't have things going on in their backyard that wouldn't be desirable.
Yes, it's a problem for us, too. Can we see something about that somewhere?
That would also violate zoning. They'd have to come to you to get approval.
They do, but trickle, trickle, here they come.
You have a succession of them coming in asking for a hot tub in the past.
Yeah, and then there's clotheslines, and there's...
all over the place, they've been doing that, and it's troublesome. And some of them think they have the right, that they own the land behind there. Do they?
They do not. It's a condominium. They just own
common area
walls.
So it's going to be important to show if you're proposing patios. I think this board wants to take that into account with the setback with the activity area next to the property line, since it's very close now.
Pergolas and such, no.
How are these units going to be heated? Is it natural gas you're bringing in off the street? Or are they going to be buried tanks on the property for each?
No, natural gas.
David, units going to have outside air conditioning units?
Oh, You're asking about compression?
So there's going to be 24 outside. Where are they all located?
We can show the location if you'd like.
David, you indicated at the beginning of your presentation that there's a final environmental impact statement that was delivered to the zoning board?
It should have been. You were an involved agency included throughout that process. I have copies of it that I can submit.
Yeah, can you submit at least one for the board to peruse if we can't find it? I'm sure it's someplace in the building department, but I would also like a copy, not just the finding statements, the actual final environmental impact statement.
Secret?
Yeah, the actual document.
These are the findings.
I'm assuming in that document it would have indications, the existing COs, the amount of floor area, the number of units that exist now,
We already have those.
and as some comparison to what is proposed.
Have those.
Okay.
Well, give me one for the file, so the file will have two. Dated the 5th of September.
Yes.
So you're planning on full basements under all of these?
Yes.
Date on that one, September 5th.
How do we access the basements?
From inside the homes. It's code that every basement have an egress window, but it would just be a window.
If it does, then it has to have an egress area way, which you don't show on here.
I'm not sure if egress area wells are typically shown on site plans, but if you'd like us
I'd like to, we've had a problem with those in the, they're getting bigger and bigger, so
Understood.
people are sort of almost making courtyards out of them.
It's not our intention,
We want to like to know that.
and we'll reflect it.
There's
Can I just
going to be
make
a
a
lot
comment on
of excavation work and stuff on the property.
The width of the main road at 26 feet is wider than most roads typically in communities like this. It's 2 feet wider than what we at Beechwood have built in other communities. Normally it's 24, and that's plenty wide. So for whatever that's worth.
Has to meet the minimum state fire code, which usually is 26 feet if it's more than 150 feet in length. So I think you're meeting
What is that?
the code
Say that
standard.
again?
My understanding of the state fire prevention building code requires 26 feet in width if it's more than 150 feet in length.
That's probably why we have 26.
And is that the minimum?
24 was good enough.
That's, yeah, the minimum. That's a minimum.
Because then if you have a car parked on there, somebody's parked on the street, and then significantly narrows the amount of egress back and forth for vehicles, so.
We anticipated that issue and have provided more parking than is required, all off-street.
What's the
Landscape is in there.
what's
no
the parking
parking
requirement for the size unit?
You have a sign
2 per
summary.
unit?
You have a sign summary here, and one of them is no parking fire lane. Where does that go? Is that on a 26-footer? Must be.
It must be. I'd have to look at the full set of drawings.
Those people
on the
could not
location.
park there.
They can park in the designated.
In the niches, yeah.
Yes.
But they can't park laterally, I guess I'm saying. They can't park.
Sorry, yeah, I thought that was
26
understood.
cars.
They cannot.
Where the landscaper's going to park. When they come in with their trucks and trailers.
They're on the motor court.
They're going to park in the motor court?
So the point that George is making is at Bishop's Pond, we don't have a problem with parking. I believe we have similar ratios there.
People are very respectful of one another. They don't park on one another in front of anyone's unit. They spend a lot of money to live there. They're not going to be objectionable to one another.
But if they park in front of their own unit, they might impede.
No, I don't. We have never had a problem yet in 3 years. not a problem.
There is parking provided for each unit, and more than enough parking for each unit, so if there are 2 cars per house.
What if they have a party? Where do they go?
That's why we gave more parking than what was minimally required.
Where do they park if they have?
There'll be available spaces throughout the...
Park or
Motor court, maybe?
motor court?
It's possible. One thing I'll say about that is their condominium rules and things like that are governed in the condominium rules. What we're proposing, it's not like it hasn't been done before at Bishop's Pond, like George said. We've got 79 residents, and as far as I know, we have not had a problem. I'm sure residents have part of this on occasion.
We had an entrance that was used as a fire exit that we forgot to put a sign up on, and people had to park there. Once we put the signs up, never another problem. Very respectful of one another.
You must screen them well.
They pay a lot of money. They pay a lot of money.
Hey.
You
It has
better
nothing to do with
respect your
etiquette
neighbor.
here. Okay.
I have a party 2 or 3 times a year at my house on South Main Street. I got parking for 6 or 8 cars in my driveway.
Yeah.
I got 100 people there, like everyone else. Everybody else uses the parking service. That's what you do. If you want to have a big party, you do that. Wherever you are in the village. You can't go down most of the streets when cars are parked on each side, Herrick Road, whatever road it is, we can't get down it now. One of my grandsons is a chief in the ambulance service, the other guy's a fireman. In the summertime, it's insanity trying to get through.
Well, as you pointed out, the landscaping is the biggest problem seemingly nowadays, and
Well,
So
we have a, please, Bishop, we have a really well landscaped, and we've never had a problem with anybody. The landscapers come in, they get their machines off, go around, knock it out, and they're gone. The
This
faster
board
they get.
approved the same type of application as Bishop's.
But that's on the edge of the village, and this is right in the
No,
heart
it's
of
in the village.
I said, if it's on the edge, this is right in the heart of the village.
I don't understand the difference.
A lot more traffic here than there is down there.
Well, there was a lot more traffic with 70-some-odd units being rented out every weekend for all these years and the amount of violations.
You're talking about the inn,
Yeah, the traffic was
talking
addressed
about the pond.
in the FEIS, and it actually will lower the traffic count, so it'll remain the same, so there's no negative impact.
I read the planning board report, they didn't seem to have, was there a traffic report done?
Yes.
Extensive
Can we
traffic
see
study
that?
done.
Yes.
And there was a finding in the finding statement on
Finding
traffic.
Yeah, we would like to see that, I think.
You have it.
You have it already.
Maybe in that report.
You have it.
Oh, okay.
In the
I do,
finding
all right.
statement. They were fine. I can pull it out for you and read it to you.
No,
I
it's-
didn't see
it's
that
in
one,
this
I just had
study,
the
but this is September, right?
planning board findings is the one I read, so.
Right,
I
the
didn't
planning
s-
board's findings were the final September.
Right, but I didn't see the one with the traffic report, so I might have it now. In other words, it might have come in after.
Should be incorporated in there.
David, we're looking for the final environmental impact statement, which consists of the draft and the response to all the comments on the draft. I'm sure it's a document about this
Right,
thick.
and you should have that. You're
Can
an
you
involved
provide us with
agency.
another copy, please?
We will. What it summarizes in the traffic, and it's on page 16, is no significant adverse traffic impacts will result from the proposed project.
That's not a traffic report.
But that's the finding after looking at the traffic report. So we provide one, and then it gets reviewed by the village's engineer, and then a finding is done after looking at those two reports. So it's a definitive document and a definitive statement.
And this is the village's engineer that they rate.
We understand, we just want to see the raw data.
Sure.
And that's in the document, so you'll get us a copy.
Yeah, I'd like to know, did they do a traffic report at all periods of like summer versus fall, spring, and winter? Because sometimes Hill Street in the summertime can be,
It was a full-on traffic report.
okay.
Do we have anything else right now? Is there anyone from the public who'd like to be heard of this application? Please come up.
Good evening, members of the board, Mr. Bruin, Patrick Fife, Toomey, Latham, Shea, Kelly, Dubin, and Quateraro, 51 Hill Street, Southampton. I'm here tonight on behalf of Whitefield Condominiums, which is at 155 Hill Street, property to the west. To answer Mr. Chairman's question, Whitefield is on approximately 16 acres of property.
16?
16 acres, yes, 29 units on 16 acres. And by way of comparison, I think the applicant's property is about 5¼ acres, and they're proposing 24 units. I do want to submit a very short, I promise it's short, letter to the board that just outlines some of Whitefield's initial concerns regarding the project. I've got a copy for the applicant's attorney as well. Just hang on a second. I'll preface my comments with the fact that, obviously based on the plan that was submitted, and like you, I had a lot of questions and I guess requests for information that seemed to be lacking in the applicant's plan. The first overall concern that Whitefield has with the project is that the nature of the first variance being requested, the change in non-conforming use. I think it's required that this board evaluate that change as a use variance under the use variance standards set forth in New York State Village Law 7712B. This is a request for a change of use, and a change of use that's not permitted by the code. I've included case law in the letter. I'm not going to go through all of it, but essentially the case law demonstrates the applicant must provide competent financial evidence that it cannot realize a reasonable rate of return if it were to develop the property for a permitted use. The applicant hasn't presented anything to that effect yet, and I don't think it would be at least possible to present evidence to show that they can't get a reasonable rate of return to develop this as either, say, 8 single-family homes, which would be the permitted yield based on the current zoning, or even the current non-conforming use, which is obviously permitted to continue. So in the absence of that evidence, I think there's a serious problem with the applicant's request for the overall first variance, which is the request to change to a non-conforming use. The second serious concern that Whitefield has is about the request for lot coverage and minimum area per dwelling variances, which Mr. Gilmartin didn't get into the numbers, but they're quite significant. They're seeking the allowable lot coverage is 33,478 square feet. The proposal is to go to 55,356 square feet. Minimum area per dwelling is 228,417 square feet. Or actually, that's what they're proposing, and 480,000 square feet is required. So these are very substantial. And the driving force behind that's obviously the number of units being proposed. As I mentioned, they're proposing 24 units on 5¼ acres, which is 4.6 units per acre. Whitefield, as I mentioned, 16 acres, has 1.8 units per acre. Obviously a substantial difference there. I also think the density and lot coverage are substantially more intense than the village's other 2 nearby condos, which are Irving and Cooper's Farm. They do have similar units per acre, but just by way of comparison, based on what we see here and what I see on the site plan, and you pointed out, it looks like some of these units are upwards of 4,800 square feet GFA. I know that the applicant needs to respond to that, but as what's presented to you, units in Whitefield are approximately 2,000 to 3,000 square feet. Units at Cooper and Irving are approximately 2,400 square feet or less in size. The applicant's also proposing an outdoor swimming pool, a 2,200 square foot clubhouse with a recreation area. The Irving has a private pool that I understand is only for 1 unit. Cooper's Farm has no pool or other amenities. Pointed out, the applicant's proposing a motor court, 4 2-car garage buildings on the motor court sides. And by way of comparison, my understanding is the Irving has no garage. So given the magnitude of these proposed units and the plan to construct 4.6 on per acre, plus these accessory structures. I don't feel, as Mr. Gilmartin said, that this isn't consistent with the character of the community. Whitefield's concern is that the applicant should propose fewer units and/or smaller units as well. Certainly would like to see what the applicant is truly proposing as far as GFA, but based on the numbers that are presented here, we have a major concern about the size of the units, in particular given the additional relief, which is the requested setback reliefs, and most particular the setback relief on the west side as it relates to Whitefield. Additional concern is also the parking garages. The 4 proposed buildings don't appear to be necessary. They're seeking setback relief for those. I believe that each unit does have its own garage. So this isn't a situation where there are units without garages, and those additional buildings, which, as I mentioned, require variances, seem to be unnecessary. Eliminating those would reduce density. You'd obviously have more space between the buildings, more vegetation would be feasible, and I think it may also allow for increased setbacks between the buildings, which is, again, Whitefield's concern. Just real quick, 2 other points with respect to the side yard setbacks. Whitefield does appreciate, and we acknowledge the applicant through the DEIS process did attempt to I guess lessen the impact of the project by proposing a 6-foot high wood fence along Whitefield's border, and I also believe along the border with the Southampton Inn, and they also proposed additional landscaping along the boundary. However, even with that, Whitefield does still have concerns, and some of them are based on what the board noted. It's not clear if the applicant is proposing patios, lighting in the back of the units, speakers on these units, what restrictions, if any, are going to be imposed on these units, air conditioning. I mean, there's a substantial number. I mean, you just look here, you've got 7 units going right along the border, the 2 garages, the additional structure, the historic structure that's being converted to dwelling units. You also have Unit 20 here as well, which will be, the side of it will be facing Whitefield. It's an effective, it's a wall of development, and all of this is going to require setback variances on the side yard. The current property, I know there are a few buildings, they're relatively minor. I think it's 2 or 3 small buildings that do violate the setback, but nowhere near to the degree of what's here, especially in terms of the number of buildings and the significance of the impact. I mean, typically you have someone coming for a side setback. It's a part of a building, maybe it's even the entire house, but it doesn't run the entire length of the property. So I think in terms of looking at whether this is substantial or not, you certainly have to factor that in, and Whitefield has severe concerns about that. In order to address the concerns, Whitefield would request that the applicant provide more detail regarding the type of fence that it's proposing. We'd also like the opportunity to have our landscape architect take a closer look at the planting plan that was presented, just to make sure that it is sufficient, that it won't have any detrimental impact to Whitefield's hedge. And then as part of any approval, we'd certainly ask the board to require the applicant to file a covenant that would require the maintenance of landscaping and the maintenance of the fence. In addition, with respect to the side yard setback, there's also concerns about lighting and sound. The parcel's current use and configuration generate, and I say current, I know it was operated as a pop-up in this past summer, but the operation of the inn, it really generated, according to folks at Whitefield, and there is one member of the community who's here with me tonight, it generated very little activity along the boundary line. The proposed change in use is going to alter that considerably. I think most of the activity, if any, was within the inn itself, and there was very little activity along the boundary line. Whereas here, again, you have at least 7, if not more, units which are going to have rear yards that face directly into Whitefield's property. So I think the board should ask, and I think it already has, for detailed plans showing the proposed configuration of these units, and in particular the rear of the units when it comes to Whitefield. We just want to see What's the back going to look like? If they are including patios, that may trigger additional concerns about lot coverage. I don't know what type of patio, if any, they are proposing. I think that needs to be specified. The applicant should be required to specify whether there'll be patios, decks, lighting, speakers in the rear of the units, and exactly what will be facing the west side. To the extent the applicant is proposing any of these features, again, we would ask that the board impose reasonable covenants. The applicant can have any rules it wants. I've lived in a condominium. Rules are broken, and having a board internally enforce them, a condominium board, is not always that easy. So we would certainly like to see some kind of covenant with respect to those types of issues that would be a condition on any approval that would at least give the village the opportunity to enforce any problems. It's just an additional protection that we would like to see in the event that the side yard variance is granted.
As we said before, we could see a succession of people coming in asking for hot tubs in these backyards.
Absolutely, and that's a concern. You know, again, and even if you have the condo rules, people don't follow them. They get that offering plan book, and the first person who has it may keep it there up on their bookshelf or their desk, and then they go to sell, and the offering plan book disappears, and nobody looks at it anymore. And bylaws, I've represented condo associations. You ask them for the bylaws, and you get something that was 15 years old, and someone else says, oh no, there's another set of bylaws. Again, we'd like to have something that's recorded, runs with the land, that's clear, so that way future owners, when they go to buy, they're on notice as to what restrictions there are in the rear yard. I would like to request that the public hearing be left open, so obviously we would have a chance to comment and evaluate anything that the applicant submits. And I would say Whitefield is willing to work with the applicant to attempt to address its concerns, but until those concerns are addressed, we would ask that the board deny the application. Thank you.
Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to be heard?
So my name is Paul Herman again, and I wear a different hat this time. I also am lucky enough to own a unit at Whitefields. So I've been in the village 20 years. I've been to the Village Latch. I've been to the Southampton Inn. Whitefields is very special. You have a mansion with 5 units, and then there's 24 units that surround in clusters of 4. Also, we have 1-story units and 2-story units, so there's a little diversity. The gentleman, although they didn't show it, I'm sitting behind them, so I saw the pictures. These are very large, postmodern-y, country-looking homes. What are they going to look like from our side? We're also lucky enough to have front patios and rear patios. So shade or sun, different times of day, it's east to west, is wonderful. So it's not like it's the road and the parking, because obviously during the week you have the landscapers, et cetera, the contractors. But the front of the houses are used, and right now, you know, you hear people on the tennis court, fine. That happens, you know, in the estate section on 5 acres, you hear tennis courts. That's normal. But I think the board did point out the issue of the backyards as they relate to our property. And people rent condominiums. They don't just live there. Renters don't follow the same rules that owners may care. As Mr. Benedict mentioned, you know, there's no issue at Bishop's Pond, but we have issues at Whitefields. We have maybe 3 units rented, but you know, they don't necessarily follow the rules because they don't know and the homeowner doesn't share. So that is a very big concern of whatever is written down. I don't need to go further. I think you folks have gotten the points. I'm here not for environmental impacts, et cetera, traffic. It's just density. 24 units on 5 acres seems to be a lot, even for this area of the village, which is absolutely beautiful. It's so nice to walk to town and see people on the sidewalk, everyone with their dogs. And this is just going to bring a lot of traffic to this lovely location. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to be heard?
Good evening, Madeline Van John, representing the Southampton Association. I just have a letter I'd like to submit to the record. I don't want to be repetitive, so I'll just say that our major concern is the density. The applicant is requesting more than double the allowable number of units, and just taking a look at the plan, I mean, of course, we're looking forward to taking a look at the revised plan showing all of the different things. We're also concerned about will there be any rear patios and the gross floor area of the unit, so we're looking forward to having that clarified. But if the number of units was reduced just by a few, all of the variance requests would be significantly less. Maybe some buildings could be built without requiring setback variances. The coverage request would be much lower. Our major concern is just the overall amount of density and the fact that just trying to fit this many units on this small of a property is essentially what's creating the need for so many variances. And if, a slightly more reasonable plan, maybe that still required variances, but just had a few less units, it would just be more conforming with the area, and it would just be a better plan overall. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I see there's quite a few light posts on the plan. Can we have a look at what the lighting would look like?
You can provide a lighting plan, and of course, it would be dark skies compliant.
Okay.
I'm not sure if anybody else would like to speak, but I just like 2 quick points. One, with respect to my learned colleague, Mr. Fife, he's wrong under the zoning code. There's a specific provision that allows this to make an application for a change from one non-conforming use to another, and it sets forth a standard, so we do not have to meet the use variance standards. And the second seems to be a general theme among the people opposing this is the density. And I'm going to read to you from the finding statement. This is the finding statement that we're all subject to. The density of the project is in line with the other attached residential developments in the immediate vicinity of the subject property. The specific finding of the planning board says, furthermore, the density of the development is compatible with other multifamily residential developments within the village. So this
is not compatible with Whitefield. No comparison at all. And that's the nearest place.
Well, but this is the finding. So you have to look at the Irving 2, and then there was analysis done of all of the condos within the village, and it was found to be compatible with the density within the village, and it was specific.
I think the one I'm going to look at,
that's the one immediate next door, and that's maybe not as beneficial a comparison for Beechwood, but then you have to look at the other ones. You have to look across the street at the Irving, which has garages facing Hill Street. I'm not sure what the...
It just looks like an awful lot of lot coverage is what it looks like.
You can see the garages because I saw them during the summer. I've been there.
In the winter, maybe you can see it.
There are some... There are some plants that are failing, so you can see the garages, but there are garages facing it.
They have 8 units, 24.
Look, I would say to you that this isn't my finding. This is the finding that came out of the planning board through the secret process. And you were part of that. You were part of that process.
We were?
Yes.
Now we're part of the process.
You're an involved agency. You were part of it. You got all of these documents to review.
We weren't involved when it came time to make the decisions. Now we're involved to make a decision.
I respectfully differ, and we probably have, I'm talking about a legal definition of involved agency in the secret process, and this board was most definitely an involved agency in that process.
We didn't vote on anything yet. We haven't voted on anything yet. We will be voting, we haven't voted yet.
Correct. On this particular application, but remember, this is a finding statement. That's the village's document, not prepared by us, the village's document. We will get you all the information that you requested, and we'll come back, hopefully, at your next public hearing.
Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Therefore, I assume we're going to hold this open for all purposes.
I would suggest that.
All in favor? Aye. I move that this meeting of the Southampton Village Zoning Board of Appeals for September 2017 is closed. All in favor? Aye.